On October 28, 2015, a group of engineers stood near the top of 432 Park Avenue and filmed a giant steel weight sliding sideways. It moved several feet in each direction, while the wind outside stayed under 25 miles an hour. That clip gets passed around with the same claim attached every time. A single 600-ton weight, and it's failing. And it's the reason a $3 billion tower is cracking apart. We checked all three of those claims. The weight isn't one weight, it's two, and together they run closer to 1,200 tons. What they're actually doing up there connects this tower to two other famous American skyscrapers that were quietly failing long before anyone admitted it. Let's start with the building, because you've almost certainly seen it. 432 Park Avenue is the plain white column that stands higher than almost everything around it in Midtown Manhattan, a perfectly square shaft of concrete rising 1,396 feet over Billionaire's Row. When it was finished in 2015, it was the tallest residential building in the Western Hemisphere. The apartments inside sold for as much as $88 million. This was the peak of the race on Billionaire's Row, where a handful of developers were competing to build the thinnest, tallest, most exclusive addresses in the world. Thin was the selling point. And the thing that makes it remarkable is the same thing that makes it a problem. It is 15 times taller than it is wide. To picture that, imagine stacking 15 dice on top of each other and asking the tower to stand up in the wind. A ratio like that is far past the point where a tall building starts to sway, so the engineers had to do something about it. And what they did is the machine in that 2015 video. Here's where the internet gets it wrong. Almost everyone who talks about 432 Park describes a single weight at the top. Some say it's 600 tons. The newer videos have started saying 800. We went and read what the companies who actually built the thing wrote down, and it's neither. There are two of them. Two separate tuned mass dampers, each one a steel box packed with metal weighing around 600 tons, which comes to somewhere between 1,200 and 1,370 tons combined, depending on which builder you ask. The company that installed them broke each one into about 200 pieces and bolted it back together near the top of the tower with more than 8,000 bolts. They are among the largest devices of their kind anywhere in the world, and they don't do the thing everyone assumes they do. A tuned mass damper does not stop a building from swaying. It can't. What it does is swing at almost exactly the same rhythm as the tower itself, just slightly out of step, so that when the wind pushes the building one way, the weight is already pulling the other way. It bleeds the energy out of the sway, so the movement settles faster and stays small enough that the people inside don't feel sick. That is the whole job. So when you watch that 2015 clip and see the weight lunging several feet sideways in a light wind, you are not watching a machine break down. You are watching a machine work extremely hard, because the building it is holding steady is one of the most slender towers ever built. Keep that difference in mind, because it is the key to the whole story. The machine is not the thing that failed. The real question is what it is working so hard to hold up. Because someone saw this coming. Years before the building was finished, back in 2012, a director at the architecture firm behind the tower wrote a warning to his own colleagues. His name was Jim Hare, and in an internal email that the New York Times later obtained, he told his team they were, in his words, going down a dangerous and slippery path that he believed would eventually lead to failure and lawsuits to come. The argument inside the firm was about the concrete. The developer wanted the tower to be a specific, pure, brilliant white. And the engineers knew that to get that exact color, they would have to weaken the recipe that would have made the concrete more resistant to cracking. One of the structural engineers, Sylvian Marcus of the firm WSP, reportedly summed up the choice in 3 words: color or cracks. They chose the color. And here is why that matters more for this tower than almost any other. On most skyscrapers, the outside you see is a skin, a curtain of glass or panels hung on a steel frame underneath. On 432 Park, the white concrete you are looking at is the structure. The columns holding the building up are the outside of the building. So when the tower flexes in the wind, it is not a decorative panel that cracks. It is the load-bearing concrete itself. Today, that argument from 2012 is playing out in court. In 2021, the building's condo board sued the developers over what it described as more than 1,500 construction and design defects, some of which it called life safety issues, and it sought hundreds of millions of dollars. Then in 2025, the owners filed again, this time alleging fraud, claiming the developers hid the cracking from buyers and from city inspectors. That complaint describes a facade plagued with thousands of cracks, and it even alleges a 10-inch deep crack in the building's core. The owners are asking for $165 million. Now these are allegations, and the developers deny all of it. The company behind the tower has said it vehemently denies the claims and called the building Manhattan's premier residence. What is not in dispute is what living there has been like. There have been serious water leaks, one of which, in 2018, sent water pouring into the elevator shafts and knocked out elevators for weeks. On a windy night in 2019, the building's sway stopped an elevator and trapped a resident inside for about 90 minutes. Residents have described the trash chute making a sound like a bomb going off, as garbage falls 1,000 feet down the core. The building's insurance costs reportedly jumped around 300% in 2 years. One early resident, Serena Abramovich, who paid millions for her apartment, told The Times that everything there was camouflage, and that if she had known then what she knew later, she would never have bought. But we told you we would check the whole story, and that means the other side, because not everyone who lives there agrees. In 2025, as the fraud lawsuit made headlines, reporters found residents who pushed back hard. One longtime owner on a high floor said the building was safe, that whatever problems there had been were fixed, and called the alarming coverage. In plain terms, nonsense meant to drive down the value of their homes. And the New York City Department of Buildings, which inspects these towers, has deemed 432 Park safe, with its last facade inspection turning up no unsafe conditions. So here is where we land, honestly. The cracking, the leaks, the elevators, the noise, those are documented. Whether the core of the building is truly in danger is contested, unproven, and being argued over right now. What we can say for certain is that a tower this ambitious, showing these kinds of problems this fast, is not new. It has happened before, twice. The first time was in Boston, and it started with falling glass. In the early 1970s, the city was building what would become its tallest tower, the John Hancock Building, a sleek, mirror glass slab designed by the architect Henry Cobb. And while it was still going up, its windows started to fail. On the night of January 20th, 1973, a winter storm hit downtown with gusts near 75 miles an hour, and huge mirrored window panels, each one weighing around 500 pounds, cracked loose and fell to the street below. And it kept happening. Eventually, the city roped off the sidewalks, and the building owners hired watchers who stood down in the plaza with binoculars, scanning the tower for the next pane about to go. Reportedly paid a little over $4 an hour to do it. So much of the glass was boarded over with plywood, while they figured it out that Bostonians started calling it the Plywood Palace. Now, the popular story for years was that the glass was falling because the whole building was swaying too much and shaking the windows loose. We checked, and that is not what happened. The engineering firm that investigated it proved the failure was in the design of the windows themselves. These were sealed double-pane units with a reflective coating bonded between the layers, and that stiff bond transferred thermal stress, the strain of the glass heating and cooling in the sun, straight into the outer pane until it cracked. That was not the sway, and it was not the building settling. It was the windows. All 10,344 of them were eventually replaced with single panes of tempered glass. But while they were solving the glass, the engineers found something far more frightening, and this part they did not advertise. The architect brought in a Swiss engineer named Bruno Thurlemann, one of the world's leading authorities on tall steel buildings, to check the structure. And Thurlemann calculated that under a rare but entirely possible wind, hitting the building the wrong way, the tower could fall over. Not crumble. Fall over, sideways, onto its narrow edge. The Boston Globe critic Robert Campbell described the danger with an image that stuck. It would be like a book standing upright on a table, tipping over onto its spine. The fix was quiet and enormous. Crews added roughly 1,500 tons of diagonal steel bracing inside the building's core. And to deal with the swaying that was making people on the upper floors seasick, they installed two 300-ton tuned mass dampers on the 58th floor, weights the size of small rooms sliding on lubricated steel. The man who designed those dampers was an American engineer named William Le Mesurier. Remember him, because a few years later, in New York, he would find himself standing over a far worse secret, his own. The John Hancock building opened in 1976, years behind schedule and far over budget, and for decades most people who admired it had no idea how close it had come to going over. The glass, the sway, and the risk of the whole thing toppling were three separate problems, and only one of them ever really made the newspapers. That is the pattern we keep running into with these towers. The problem the public sees is almost never the one the engineers are actually afraid of. That brings us to the building where Le Mesurier's own name was on the line. In 1977, a year after Boston opened, a new corporate tower went up in Midtown Manhattan for the bank Citicorp. It was 59 stories, and it was daring. To fit a church that refused to move off the corner of the lot, Le Mesurier lifted the entire skyscraper up onto four massive columns, placed not at the corners, but at the middle of each side, so the tower seemed to hover above the street. Wind was handled by a stack of giant diagonal braces running up the building like a series of chevrons. And to keep it from swaying, it became the first big skyscraper in America to use a tuned mass damper, a 400-ton block riding on a thin film of oil near the top. On paper, it was brilliant. Before we get to what happened next, one quick thing. If a story like this is worth your time, tapping the like button, the thumbs up just below this video, tells YouTube to put more of these in front of people who would want to see them. And if you would like us to keep making them, the subscribe button right under the video is how you say yes. It costs nothing, and it is the whole reason we can keep checking these stories instead of just repeating them. All right, back to New York in 1978. Because in 1978, Le Mesurier got a question that unraveled the whole thing. For years, the trigger was described as a single phone call from an anonymous student. We looked closer, and it is more tangled than that. A Princeton undergraduate named Diane Hartley had questioned, in her thesis, exactly how the tower handled winds coming at its corners. She never actually spoke to Le Mesurier himself, and he always remembered the question coming from a different student, one whose name was never written down. Who really set off the panic is argued about to this day, but the calculation, once someone finally made him run it, came out the same. Le Mesurier had always calculated for wind hitting the flat faces of the tower. When he sat down and worked out what a diagonal wind, striking the corner, would do to those braces, the number frightened him. A quartering wind raised the strain in some of those braces by 40%. And because of a decision made during construction, that increase mattered far more than it should have. The joints in those braces were supposed to be welded, which is enormously strong. To save money, they had been changed to bolted joints instead, and the change had been approved without Le Mesurier fully reviewing it. When he ran the real numbers, that 40% jump in the braces became a 160% overload on the bolts. The weakest joint, up on the 30th floor, was the one that would let go first, and if it did, the failure could bring down the entire tower. He put a number on it that no engineer ever wants to calculate. He estimated the building could be torn apart by a storm strong enough to hit roughly once every 16 years. And hurricane season was coming. He could have stayed quiet and hoped. Instead, Le Mesurier walked into the offices of Citicorp and told them their brand new headquarters had a flaw that could kill people. And then, together, they fixed it in secret, all through August, September, and October of 1978. Crews worked at night, after the offices emptied out. Carpenters built plywood enclosures around each of the critical joints, and welders moved through the building laying 2-inch thick steel plates over more than 200 of those bolted connections, night after night, finishing before the workers came back in the morning. Behind the scenes, the city built a plan for the worst case. The police mapped out an evacuation stretching 10 blocks around the tower. The Red Cross put thousands of volunteers on standby. Forecasters watched the Atlantic 3 times a day. And partway through the repair, a real hurricane, Hurricane Ella, began climbing the coast toward New York before it finally turned back out to sea. A newspaper strike in the city meant almost none of this reached the public. By the time it was finished, the tower was strong enough to stand through the kind of storm you would see once in 700 years. And the whole thing stayed secret for 17 years, until a magazine writer finally told the story in 1995. But here is the part that makes even this story more complicated than the legend. And we would be lying to you if we left it out. Decades later, engineers at the National Standards Institute went back and reran Le Mesurier's problem with modern methods and far better data. And their conclusion was that the diagonal, corner winds he had been so afraid of actually put less load on the building than winds hitting it straight on. In other words, the specific danger that set off that whole frantic secret repair may have been overstated by the older way of doing the math. Le Mesurier fixed his building in the dark, against a threat that later analysis suggests might not have been as dire as he believed. He did it anyway, and most people would say he was right to. So that is 3 towers across 50 years. Boston, where the engineers quietly braced a building against tipping over and swapped out more than 10,000 windows, and let the public go on believing it was only ever a glass problem. New York in 1978, where a man found a lethal flaw in his own design and fixed it in the dark before a storm could find it first. And 432 Park Avenue, where the argument over whether the building is truly in danger is not happening quietly at all. It is happening in a courtroom, in the newspapers, with both sides shouting. And that difference is the honest heart of this. It is tempting to tell you the old engineers were heroes who owned their mistakes, and the modern developers are villains who buried theirs. But it is messier than that, and you deserve the messier version. The Boston fix and the New York fix worked partly because they stayed secret, and partly because they got lucky. A hurricane turned away. A newspaper strike kept the city in the dark. And in Le Mesurier's case, the very danger he raced to fix may have been smaller than he thought. What made those stories end well was not integrity alone. It was integrity plus a great deal of luck and a public that never had to weigh in. 432 Park does not get that. Its problems are on the record, in filings anyone can read, argued in the open while people still live inside. Whether that ends in a real repair or a real reckoning, we do not know yet. What we do know is that the building sold as the most solid address in America is being tested in a way the Empire State Building, hit by a bomber in 1945 and still standing today, never was. That is not a clean contest between old and new engineering, and we will not pretend it is. But it is hard not to notice which one the public trusted and which one is in court. And here is the last thing, the thing that started all of this. Those two machines at the top of 432 Park are still up there right now, in the dark, swinging back and forth to hold a mostly empty tower steady over Midtown. Many of the apartments beneath them were never really lived in. They were bought as places to park money, and they sit dark most nights. Which leaves a question nobody has answered. Those dampers only keep working as long as someone maintains them. So if the owners keep staying away, if the lawsuits drag on and the building empties out further, what happens to the two machines still working around the clock to keep it standing? We went looking for the source of one number, and we found a 1,200-ton question hanging over Park Avenue. If you want to see the buried machine we tracked down inside another American landmark, that story is on screen right now.